Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our meeting. Welcome to the April 14th Board of Education meeting. Can we please say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Do we have any, public comments are next, right? Do we have any public comments?
No. No public comments.
All right, so for future meetings, if anyone out there who's watching is interested, you can contact our district clerk, Julie Miss, by 12 noon on the day of the meeting if you'd like to send in any public comment. There's no recognition, so we will move on to the presentation by Mr. Geis.
Okay, so we are obviously in challenging times. That's no different as we're developing a budget during the COVID-19 pandemic. It has made for some interesting times when we're developing the budget. So I have a lot of information to cover. I'm going to start by kind of reminding us where we were prior to the COVID-19 with our first draft budget and some key data associated with that. I'll then get into the enacted New York State budget, and we'll go through the details with the governor. Typically, the governor's budget is a starting point. It's our worst case scenario, and then we get additional funds once the budget becomes enacted. Fortunately, this year, that is not going to be the case. And then I'm going to go through the capital project scenarios related to our $32.25 million project, the timing of the work and it's completed, and how that will impact our budget from the expenditure side, from the revenue side, and within the revenue side, in particular, building aid and the property tax cap. And then I put it right out here. Our deficit is currently going to be sitting at just around $334,000. So we'll go through how we got there. And then want to go back and look at 2008 financial crisis, and just kind of go through the fund balance and reserves and how we balance our budget during that difficult time, and then kind of fast forward to the situation that we're dealing with now, and kind of show the parallels on what that could look like and really kind of shape where we are with the stance of our fund balance and our reserves. Now I want to take a look at the projected budget timeline. This is just projected, nothing's in stone yet, and I'll get to that when we get to those slides. And then next steps, and this really is a long-term approach. We're doing things right now in the 1920 budget. We obviously have to develop the budget for 2020, 2021, and then there is going to be an impact as we move forward, and you'll see that as we go throughout the presentation. So first, I want to take just a quick look at the current first draft budget key data. Our expenditure budget was almost $85.5 million. Our revenue budget was almost $84.7 million, which left us with about a $780,000 deficit. At this point in time, or at that point in time, we had a property tax cap of 1.87%. And if we went out to that max, which we were planning on, our tax levy was at just under $41 million. At the time, we were using the budget back from January, and our state aid projection was just under $37.5 million. And we had approximately $1.4 million appropriated, inappropriated fund balance and reserves that we were going to use in order to balance our budget. So that was at the same level as the current year. So that's kind of just a snapshot on where we were as of our first draft budget. Obviously, a lot has happened since then. So as we continue through, we now have an enacted state budget. Foundation aid is going to remain flat at 1920 levels. This means that we're losing approximately $450,000 from what the governor had come out with back in January. There was some good news, the consolidation of all of the aid categories that were going to be rolled up into the foundation aid. That proposal was rejected. That was mainly going to impact us with our BOCES aid and with our instructional materials aid and our hardware aid. So that was a good piece of news that came out of the enacted budget, that those are going to not roll into foundation aid. Another piece of good news was a community school set aside. That is remaining flat from 1920 levels. So for statewide, the governor has allocated $250 million. He had proposed in January to increase that to $300 million and also increase the number of schools that would have to follow under those guidelines. We would have been one of those schools. It would have meant that we would have had to take $121,000 of our foundation aid and carve that out for specific purposes related to a community school. So that, because it remained flat, that was rolled back. We do not have that stipulation any longer. The governor also wanted to adjust building aid. He was toying with the idea of adding a new tier to the building aid so that he could lower the building aid ratio. And he also wanted to look at what expenses were aided through building aid and limit what could qualify as building aid eligible. So that was also rejected. More good news, that really wouldn't have impacted our current projects, but it would have impacted us as we continue moving forward with our capital projects. Transportation aid adjustment was also rejected. The governor wanted to cap the transportation aid to the rate of inflation, or the rate of inflation plus a growth aid. And he also was tinkering with the formula. There's 3 different ratios that go into the transportation aid. He wanted to eliminate one of those ratios, and that would have had a negative impact on our transportation aid. And you'll see how that flows through when I get into actually looking at the Hilton data. One of the things that did go through was the CSD special ed placements. This is increasing district share from 38.424% up to 56.848%. It used to be that the state would cover about 18%, and now that's being shifted over to districts. So that has a really a minor effect. We have only a couple students that fall into this category, and it ranges depending on their placement for anywhere between an additional 22,000 and 41,000. So, and that's if they were in that placement for the full year. So it does have an impact on us. It's not a great impact, but that is something that went through, and I've worked very closely with the special education department once we knew that that passed. All other expense-based aids continue to run as is, and they are fully funded. So our BOCES aid, our building aid, our instructional materials aid, our excess cost aids, all of those are continuing as they were the year before. So that was some good news. We had 2 new line items that came on our state aid runs this year. One was called a pandemic adjustment, and then the other was called a federal CARES restoration. The pandemic adjustment is a deduct from our state aid. If you're around back in the 2008 financial crisis, at that point in time, it was called the gap elimination adjustment. It's very similar to that. And for us, it's about $489,000 specific to Hilton. For the state, it's about $1.1 billion. Now, if you hear the governor talk about the state, state revenue situation, he's talking between a $10 and $15 billion deficit for the state. So that kind of just puts in perspective how much is coming from education at this time. And I say at this time, and the next slide, you'll understand why I use those words. It is being offset completely by the federal CARES restoration. This is the federal stimulus package, the $2.2 trillion package where aid is flowing through education. So that's great for this year, but we anticipate that the federal CARES restoration is ultimately going to go away, and the pandemic adjustment may not follow suit. It's going to be dependent upon the state budget. So we could have, and we believe that there could be a multi-year impact on that pandemic adjustment, even though in year 1 it is being offset. Probably the most worrisome piece of the enacted budget is the state revenue reduction plan. And in essence, the governor has put out 3 assessment periods. The assessment periods are running from April 1st through April 30th. So we're actually in the first assessment period right now. And then from May 1st to June 30th. And the third assessment period runs from July 1st through December 31st. And in essence, it's covering the remainder of the 2020 calendar year. And what this does is it gives the Division of Budget the ability to look during each of those 3 assessment periods to determine if their estimated or budgeted revenues, how they compare to the actual revenues during that time frame. And if actual revenues are coming in at 99% or less of their budgeted revenues, that triggers them to be able to put a plan together and take aid back from municipalities, including school districts. they also during that assessment period can look on the expenditure side. And if the actual expenditures are coming in at 101% or greater of the estimated expenditures or budgeted expenditures, that also can trigger the a take back of revenue from the state side. So in essence, if that at any one of the three assessment periods that triggers, the Division of Budget will create a plan. We don't know how long it'll take them to put that plan together, but once they come up with a plan, they will give that plan to the legislature. The legislature will have 10 days to either respond to the plan as is and approve it, or reject it. If they reject it, then they'll have to come up with their own plan and put that out. So there's a lot of unknowns associated with this. We don't know the dollar amount that can be reduced. It could be, equal to the pandemic adjustment of, $489,000 for us. It could be double that. It could be $1 million. It could be $3 million. We just don't know. They have a lot of latitude in what they can do. There is a maintenance of effort clause in there, but it was stated that they can also apply for a waiver on that as well. And that's at the state level. So that's some of the details behind it that I won't get into for this presentation, but there are some nuances associated with that. We also don't know the timing of the reduction after each review period. We're not sure if the Division of Budget is going to come out on May 1st and say, here's the analysis and we're good, or if they're going to come out on May 15th or June 1st. We just don't know. So we're waiting to see that. And then 2 out of the 3 assessment periods are actually in our 1920 fiscal year, our current fiscal year. So if they determine that there is a shortfall in state revenues and that they are going to do a take back, are they going to be taking back aid from us in the 1920 year, or will they be taking aid away from us in the 2021 year? So that's still something that's to be determined. We have a lot more questions in this area than answers, and we're hopeful that we'll have an idea of what the process will look like prior to having to adopt a budget. I'm not going to hold my breath on that, but we're hopeful that that could happen. So what does this mean for Hilton? So I'm kind of going to focus through this slide right here is looking at what the governor originally proposed for 2021 back in January, and then comparing it to the enacted budget that was adopted in April. So if you remember back in January when he had combined all the aids together, he was showing this really large increase for our foundation aid. And you can see that even the settled budget, there's about a 4.8, almost a $4.9 million difference there. And that's because if you look right down to the BOCEs on that first column for the January data, you're seeing that that's 0. If you look down to hardware, that's 0. If you look down to instructional material aids, that's 0. Those were all of the ones that expense-based aids that the governor wanted to combine and put into the foundation aid. So if you took that 4.8 million and then you'd reduce it by the 4 million from the BOCES surplus, and then the 85,000 from the hardware and the 357,000 from the instructional materials aid, it netted to about a $450,000 take back in foundation aid when we looked at it from January to April. The UPK grant stayed the same. That's actually in the federal fund, so I won't spend time on that. Nothing changed on our high cost aid. We had minor changes related to our private excess cost aid. And then you get to transportation. So transportation did increase, and this was related to his proposal being rejected to cap the aid and to tinker with that formula. So because he was tinkering with that formula, it would have cost us as a district about $166,000. Because that was rejected, that's now flowing through the expense-based aid, and we picked up additional funding there. Our building aid stayed the same, although I'll have many more slides as we talk about the capital project that will discuss where we're going to land with the building aid. And then as I mentioned, the pandemic adjustment and the CARES restoration, those are in equal amounts going in opposite directions. It's a takeaway from the state and it's an add from the federal government, so that keeps us whole. So with this all said and done, the grand total reduction from where we were in January to where we are currently right now is a $277,000 decrease in state aid. And it's really important to note it's where we are now. There's going to be, obviously those assessment periods could have changes in it, and there's other risk factors associated with the numbers that I'll be talking about a little bit later on. And then lastly, I'll just point out that the community schools in January, we would have been bound by that $121,000 carve out. And because it was reverted back, we don't have to deal with that in the 2021 year. So that goes to 0 under the enacted budget. This spreadsheet is pretty much a duplication of what you just saw, except it's comparing our enacted budget in 1920 to our enacted budget in 2021. So just a couple things I wanted to point out. This shows that our foundation aid was capped at 0, so we lost that $450,000. And you know, if foundation aid was fully funded, it's literally millions of dollars lower than what it could be if we were fully funded on that. You can see we had a slight increase in BOCES. We had a slight increase in our private excess costs. We had a couple small minor adjustments to hardware, instructional material aids, nothing out of the ordinary. And then you get to transportation. So transportation, again, increased by that $160,000 on the slide before because of the tinkering of the formula. And then when you compare that to the 1920 year, you can see we're up about $417,000. Now there is some risk associated with that one because, as you know, with our buses not running on our regular routes and you know us not having to purchase as much fuel, we may not actually spend as much in transportation that we've done in years past. And this is an expense-based aid, so whatever we spend is what we get aided on. So if our expense goes down, then our aid will also go down. So that's something that Jeremy and I are currently looking at to determine if that's an accurate reflection of what we think is going to happen. But that number could come down, so we do have some risk associated with that. Building aid has some minor adjustments, so we're good with that. If we cycle back up to the high cost, excess cost, in 1920, that has been updated to reflect the actual amount we're going to receive. So at the time when the budget was enacted, we did not have all of our stack forms in. We now do. So that number is going to be much more in line with the 1.3 million that we're projected to get in 2021. So again, overall, you have the pandemic adjustment coming down 488, and you have the CARES restoration going up 488. The important part to note on this is, one, there's still risk left as we're continuing to vet the numbers and see how things are going to work with the enacted budget. And two, that we're down 277,000 if everything else stays the same from where we were when the governor proposed his budget in January. So I want to get into the capital project scenarios. We have three scenarios that I want to talk about. The first one, this is all related to the $32.25 million project. And this is really based on the timing of when the work is going to be complete. So for scenario one, if the work is complete for phase 2, which is work being done at Quest Elementary School, Village Elementary School, and Merton Williams, and phase 2B, which is work being done at the high school and Northwood Elementary School. If all of that work is completed by December of 2020, that's what we're calling scenario one. If we jump down to scenario 3, because that's the other extreme, both of those same phases wouldn't be complete until June of 2021. And then scenario 2, because phase 2 is pretty complete, we still have some work left to be done, but it's much more minor in scope, and phase 2B is just really starting now. So we're looking at scenario 2, which is the phase 2 work being completed by December of 2020, and the phase 2B work being completed by June 2021. So really, before COVID-19, we were probably trending more towards scenario 1. Now scenario 1 becomes the more riskier of the scenarios. Scenario 3 is probably the least riskiest, but it gives more, it means our levy would go up, and I'll explain that as I get into those scenarios in more detail. And then scenario 2 is probably where we're going to land. There is still risk associated with it, but that is likely where we're heading as we continue down the project. Some of the risks that we're concerned about is if the governor puts out another executive order and he deems school construction not essential work and we have to stop the project, that obviously is going to impact when we're going to complete it. If we have the COVID flu go through a particular vendor or contractor that we have, and they have people that are have to be quarantined, or they have to shut down altogether, that also could have an impact on when we're going to complete our project. So those are just a couple scenarios that we've talked through. We've talked through many more with our capital project team, but there is obviously risk associated with each of the three scenarios. So we're going to get into a little bit more detail on each one because this will impact our expenditure side for debt service, principal, and interest. This will impact our building aid. And because we've impacted debt service expense and building aid, it will also have an impact on our property tax cap, which will impact our tax levy. So if we take a look at scenario 1, again, this is both phase 2 and 2B completed by December 2020. As we now have worked with our financial consultant and analyzed, what this would look like based on updated cash flows from our construction manager, we believe that our principal and interest is going to decrease by just over $200,000. We also believe that our building aid is going to increase by about $551,000. Now, if you remember on the first draft budget, we built in, even though the governor had said that we were going to get about $2.8 million, we added an additional $1.5 million because we anticipated on having our entire project complete and moving that forward. So now what I'm saying is we're going to be able to add in about an additional $551,000 from that number. So that's going to bring us up to where we actually think we're going to land if we use this scenario. So by reducing our interest and principal payments on the expenditure side and increasing our building aid, that's going to have a slight impact on our property tax cap. That would drop our property tax cap from 1.87% down to 1.79%, which means we would have to reduce our levy by about $33,000. If we look at scenario 2, this is phase 2 completed by December of 2020 and phase 2B completed by June of 2021. Our expenditures will decrease by about $671,000, both in principal and interest. And our revenues will only increase by about $87,000 under this scenario. Our property tax cap will change as well, and it'll drop to the same 1.79% from the 1.87. It's rounding, so that's why you saw a little bit different amount on the tax levy. I'm only showing this out to 2 decimal places, but it goes out multiple decimal places, so that's just a rounding factor there. And this is most likely where I believe we're going to land as we continue to go through that. We still haven't finalized it, but this is kind of our best guesstimate based on where we are now and all the factors that are involved. And then scenario 3, this is both phases completed by June of 2021. This is the least riskiest of the scenarios for us. And as you can see, the expenditures for principal and interest will decrease by about $711,000, but our building aid will also decrease by about $456,000. So if that happens, the property tax cap would change from 1.87% and go all the way up to 3.04%. So if we went out to that property tax cap max at 3.04%, our levy would go up by about $470,000. So in essence, in this scenario, we're shifting the revenue, and we're saying we're not going to get the revenue from the state in the form of building aid in the first year, but we will have to, it'll be offset by a higher property tax cap, and we'll be collecting that from the community. The good news is when we look at kind of the first draft budget and we look at each of the 3 scenarios, the deficit, regardless of which scenario we decide to go down, is the same at that $334,228. So again, if you look at the overall expenditures, those are changing depending on the scenario based on the changes in the principal and interest payments related to debt service. The revenues are changing based on changes to the building aid and the property tax cap, and also the reduction in aid based on the settled state budget. And if you go down below and look at it, you can kind of see under each scenario what's happening. So under the first draft budget, we have about $40.9 million in the tax levy. We're staying relatively the same under scenario 1 and scenario 2, but you're seeing quite a large increase from the first draft budget to scenario number 3. And that's because the property tax cap would go up to 3.04%. If you look at the building aid on the revenue side, you can see that we originally budgeted at the first draft budget of $4.3 million. Again, the governor had come out at 2.8. We went up that 1.5 million. We'd be adding an additional funds in scenario 1 and scenario 2 at varying levels. So it would go up slightly and actually quite significantly in scenario 1 and slightly in scenario 2. And then we'd actually see a decrease from 4.3 million down to 3.88 under the scenario number 3. All other state aid, when you compare the first draft budget to any one of the 3 scenarios, right now is down that $277,000. And right now we've left all local revenues flat, and same thing with fund balance and reserves. So, and we're keeping those at the same level, about 1.4 million for the fund balance and reserves. So transitioning to kind of look at the financial crisis that took place in 2008. You can see that this was the stock market crash, the housing market crash, a lot of bank failures at this point in time. Obviously not the same type of crisis we're dealing with now, but it at least gives us a little bit of what we think is a roadmap on what could potentially happen. So in 2008-9, everything was going along well. We had that crisis, and we utilized about an additional $100,000 to balance our 9-10 budget. So not much in the year right after the crisis. But you can see what happens in 2010-11. We increased our use of fund balance and reserves by about 1.5 million in order to balance our budget. And that was on top of making approximately $3 million in cuts to our budget. So we used a combination of those two to come up with a balanced budget that year. That was also the year that we received some federal aid. It was called ARA at the time. So very similar to what we're seeing now with the pandemic adjustment and then the federal CARES restoration. So in the 10-11 year, we had the take back from the gap elimination adjustment, and we had the addition of the federal ARA revenue. And then the federal ARA revenue went away the next year, but the gap elimination adjustment didn't. It actually took 6 years before the gap elimination adjustment was fully removed, and we were back to kind of what was the normal foundation aid at that time. So in the 11-12 year, we had to use an additional $500,000 of fund balance and reserve in order to balance our budget. And then we started that slow decline to get back on, and with our goal of trying to get down to, you know, if possible, the 8, 9, 9, 10 levels. We weren't quite there yet, but we were trending down that path. So that was how the 2008 financial crisis kind of looked in what we did with our fund balance and reserves and to balance our budget. So if we fast forward now, and we actually take our starting point, which is 1920, again, it's about that $1.4 million, and take the same increases and the same concept that I just explained, this is what our graph would look like. So in 1920, our starting point is 1.4 million. We only would need a little bit to balance our budget. I use the same numbers that we used in the prior crisis, so going up about $100,000. And then you can see in the 2021-22 year, we needed a lot more to balance our budget. So we went up $1.5 million. We'd be up to about the $2.9 million mark. And then once we anticipate having the federal CARES go away, if that pandemic still is in place, we could go up an additional 500,000 after that. And then we would start to see that downward trend, and it wouldn't take place until that 2023-24 year. So I put that out there just to kind of show you what the roadmap would look like if we utilized our fund balance so in reserves. So now if we get into a little bit more specifics, just to kind of give you the balance, you know, that was one of the things that as a district, I think we've done a really good job over the years about not overtaxing our community and generating a lot of fund balance. You know, the comptrollers come in, they've audited us. They've said that our budgeting practices are very, very solid, and we're continuing those practices here. So we have 4 restricted reserves. It's the unemployment reserve, retirement contribution reserve, the liability reserve, and the capital reserve. So those restricted reserves total about $5.8 million. Now the capital reserve is probably the most restricted out of all of the reserves. In order to move money out of that fund, which is for a specific purpose that the community had already voted on, we would have to get voter authorization or voter approval in order to move it from the capital reserve into another reserve. So that one is a little bit more restrictive, even in the restrictive category with the others. If you look at the unassigned fund balance, the statutory limit's 4%, and we are maxed out at $3.2 million. So if you take the total of the restricted reserves and the unassigned fund balance, the 4%, also known as a rainy day fund, we're up to about $9 million in total general fund balance. So what does that mean? That means if we strictly use our fund balance and reserves in order to balance our budget, we would run out of fund balance in less than 4 years. So obviously we're not positioned well with our fund balance in order to weather this for a long period of time. And we're going to have to take a balanced approach in how we move forward in developing this budgets and future budgets. If we are not successful in removing the restrictions related to the capital and going out to the voters for that, we would run out of fund balance in less than 3 years. We would only have about 7.7 million, and as you saw in the chart before, we would be out of fund balance in about 3 years. So this is not going to be the way that we're going to balance the budget. We're going to look at a balanced approach. We're going to look at potential cuts. We're going to look at this over a multi-year process, including currently, right now. So our 19-20 budget, obviously with school closed, we do have some expenditure lines that will not be expended to the extent that they normally are. I alluded to that earlier with transportation. So that would be things like fuel. That would be things like field trips, athletic trips, second semester supplies, utilities, since our buildings are not occupied. So those are all things that we should see positive variances on, which in 1920, which could lead us to have a greater amount of fund balance than we typically do at the end of the year. And if that's the case, one of the strategies could be for us to, one, either exceed the statutory limit of 4% and take our chances on an audit that we would get a comment on that. I have recently heard that they are having discussions that they may allow a 1 year, the ability for us to go over that for a 1 year period. If that's the case, that'd be great. That will give us the most financial flexibility as we look at our out year budgets. If they don't, we could potentially look to move anything that's over the 4% into one of those first 3 reserves, which gives us a little bit more flexibility, and then use those reserves in order to balance the budget. It doesn't give us as great a flexibility, but it still is an option that we could potentially go to if they don't allow us to exceed that 4%, or if we don't decide to do it on our own. There are districts in the state that have gone over the 4% even without a crisis, and have taken their lumps on an audit. That would just be something that we'd have to weigh the pros and cons to determine if that's something that we want to entertain. Okay, so now I wanted to get into a little bit of the budget timeline. This is a potential, this is not actual. So per the governor's executive order 202.13, the governor postponed school budget elections to no sooner than June 1st. So the first eligible Tuesday would be June 2nd. And based on such a change, this is what our overall kind of deadlines would look like related to the school budget. This came out from the New York State ASBO as kind of a guide. So there's additional information on some salary disclosures and the property tax report cards we have to file. But if we focus on the top part, so June 1st is the earliest we can vote, and that first Tuesday would be June 2nd. We would have to have the board adopt the budget between May 12th and May 19th. That's when we'd have to have the hearing. We'd have to we'd have to have the hearing between May 19th and May 26th. And then we would have to mail out the budget notice no later than May 27th in order to meet that budget vote date of June 2nd. And we have no idea, because things could change. The governor has in his executive order that there could be modifications. We've heard everything from just allowing the Board of Education to pass the budget as long as you're within compliance in the property tax cap, to we're going to have absentee ballots and everybody's going to vote that way, to we could have the traditional vote where people are coming into our buildings. So it just depends on how the rest of this COVID-19 situation plays out. And lastly, kind of our next steps. So we are looking to evaluate the accuracy of our state aid based on the adopted budget. We are preparing for the worst. We're not sure what the worst could be. We know that we have some risk associated with our transportation, and a little bit of risk even with our BOCES aid that's another expense-driven aid that we could potentially not spend as much as we had in the prior year, mainly in the area of technology, but there are a couple other areas that we may not be spending the full amount as we normally would. And then there could be potential reductions, additional reductions from the state in those assessment periods. So Those are some of the things that we're still keeping a close eye on as we continue through the process. We are planning for, we have to put a plan in place for the reduction of staffing and programs. Casey, Barb, Scott, and I have discussed this kind of at the 10,000 foot level. We have meetings set up on Wednesday and Friday of this week where we're going to get into more detail. The cabinet has also been tasked with looking at their respective areas and determine where they may look for potential reductions. And the goal would be to, at least in year one, would be to avoid wholesale reductions to staffing and programs. We don't really know what's going to go on yet. So if we just cut everything and then the reductions don't take place for whatever reason, we're just cutting for the sake of cutting, and we're going to be decimating our programs and instruction that we're offering our students. So we're going to really be focused on attrition for this year and then be prepared for deeper cuts for future budget years. We're also looking at the plan to utilize our fund balance and reserves. So you saw the slides on that. We obviously will run out of, if we use this as a sole mechanism, we'll run out of our fund balance and reserves in 3 or 4 years. So it will be a balanced approach as we go through and develop our next several budgets. The other thing we typically do at this time is reach out to our town assessors to determine what their assessment values are. We've already heard back from Parma. Their equalization rate is going to drop from 100% down to 97%. We did not hear back from the other 3 towns, although they have submitted to the state their unapproved rates. Greece is planning on staying at 100%, so is Clarkson, and Hamlin is preparing to drop from 93% down to 91%. So we just have to keep that in the back of our mind. That's kind of the next step as we determine what our overall property tax cap is, what the equalization rates and how that'll impact our assessment values, and then ultimately how that will play into the property tax rates. And then lastly, we have to determine the state of readiness to potentially have a superintendent budget recommendation for the May 12th budget. That would be the latest we could do it. And if something changes at the state level, we could potentially be coming back and asking for a special board meeting in order to approve the budget if we're not ready to go by that May 12th deadline. So I apologize, that was a lot of information. It was a lot of numbers. At this point in time, I'll open it up if there's any questions.
So I have a question. As far as cuts, so I listened to a webinar was 2 weekends ago, and then just listening to the governor daily, he keeps saying draconian cuts. It doesn't sound like, you said like we weren't going to go there the first year. Do you think we're going to be cutting like for the next number of years?
I do. I think that we are going to, in year one, I think we're going to have, because of the federal stimulus money, we're not going to have to cut as deep in order to balance our budget. I think what we're really going to, and we're probably going to be able to manage that through attrition. I think as we go forward into the out years, that's where we're going to have to potentially have some even deeper cuts. If we can manage it through attrition only, that'd be great. My hunch or my guess, my gut, is that we're going to have some really difficult conversations, similar to those conversations that we had back in 2008 in developing with that financial crisis and developing our budget for the 10-11 year. So I think it's coming. I just think we're a year off from those draconian cuts, as you put it.
So when you use money from the reserves, we have to pay the reserve fund back? Yes.
So no, if we are using a reserve in order to balance our budget, and we physically have to use that reserve for whatever reason, then that money is gone. We don't pay it back.
Okay.
Hey, Adam, relative to the surplus for the current year and the 4% limit, did I understand you correctly that if we exceed that this year, and there's certainly some expenses we're not incurring, so that it sounds like there's a pretty good chance we will, that basically the implications of simply and just leaving it in the fund balance is that we're just going to get a slap on the wrist and an audit letter?
Yeah, if we were audited by whether it's our external auditor, our internal auditor, or the comptroller's audit, potentially they would slap us on a hand, say you carried over more than the 4%, and we'd have to develop a plan and what we're going to do to make sure that we don't have that going forward in the future. Districts have
solve that problem.
yeah, exactly. Districts have done that even without a crisis, and they have been commented. If you follow the comptroller's audits, you will see that on there. But there's no other negative ramifications that I'm aware of other than, you have to come into compliance. So, and I did hear at a webinar, actually a couple webinars, that they were talking about for a 1-year period of time, allowing districts to exceed that statutory 4% because they know it's going to be some difficult budget times ahead. So if they can prepare because we're closed now and see additional fund balance above that 4%, that could give us the ultimate flexibility as we move forward.
Right. That strikes me as prudent, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
That have any effect on our credit rating?
Yeah, you know what? I have we're looking at DASNY for bonding for our capital projects. So that's a really timely question, Russ. I've gone through and worked with our bond counsel, Tim McGill, as well as our financial consultant, Bernie Donegan. Typically, we've gone out to the public market for our bonds because of the turmoil in the financial market with 1,000-point drops here and 500-point increases there on the stock market. That has wreaked havoc on the bond market. And so we're actually protecting ourselves by going to DASNY. Part of what we have to do when we go to DASNY, they have 2 questionnaires. They're both about 10 pages long, where we have to answer all questions regarding those and then submit them. And then we actually have a phone conference set up for April 20th in order to go through, and they actually want to speak with me just to talk about the finances of the district and how we're dealing with the COVID crisis and how that's impacting us overall. Right now, we have not asked for a rate determination from Standard & Poor's or Moody's. I anticipate as we get closer to bonding, typically I should say when we get closer to bonding on the public market, we would take that step. However, when we're going through DASNY, I'm not sure that's a requirement. So that'll be kind of to be determined. So I know that was a long answer to say, yes, it could impact our credit rating, but at this point in time, I just don't have enough answers to know if it will or will not.
Ironically, because it's such a prudent move, it may actually help it.
Yeah, absolutely. Could in the short term for sure.
So Adam, the assessment periods?
Yeah.
So the governor may reassess in those each month for stuff that's happening in that month, like real time?
Correct.
So the reduction would take place in that assessment period, or you don't know?
So my understanding is the reason why he chose those assessment periods are because it aligns with the state budget. So April 1st was the start of the state budget. He put the first assessment period for the month of April. The second assessment period was for the month of May and month of June. And then the third was for January through June of 2021. So he is going to look at the overall state revenues. And remember, you're having things like even the delay in filing property taxes is having an impact on state cash flow. So we have no idea how he's going to do it. He did say it was going to be, and this is getting real technical, Tom and Brian and some others who are financially savvy may understand this, but he's looking for using what's called a cash basis instead of an accrual basis to make that determination, which has got us nervous because that's not typically how we do things. We typically use what's called a modified accrual basis. And so the delay of those revenues related to the tax filing date could actually make it look like, from a cash perspective, that the state has no revenue coming in. And that could easily trigger having revenues fall below that 99% of what they estimated for April. And it could trigger the Division of Budget to put in a plan that could take money away from all municipalities, including school districts. The other piece, quite frankly, that we don't know is we have no idea how the state budgeted. Did they budget like as if it was a typical year, or did they have their estimates reduced down to what they actually think is going to happen and set a budget from that perspective? And now we're going to compare a reduced budget for the month of April compared to what they actually think is going to happen. If they just budgeted April as of normal and didn't take that into account, we're going to have a much more likely of a chance of having revenues come in lower than anticipated.
Right, okay.
And then the last thing I'll say, just to reiterate, is we don't know, once that comes up and they go through that assessment period, we don't know the timing of it. We don't know the dollar amount that's going to be out there. We're not going to have a say in that either. And we don't know if it's going to impact our 1920 state aid that's still due to us because it falls within that assessment period that the state outlined, or if they're going to take away future state aid from us in order to balance that. So those are all unknowns. That's why I said that portion of the enacted budget has me the most worried.
Yeah, I think it's very safe to assume that there's going to be reductions along the way. Of course, the $1 million question is how much, and that is just a complete wild card.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions for Adam?
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Nice job.
All right. So I was looking at the agenda and we don't have anything about approving the minutes. So how do we go about, we got to go about altering the agenda again?
You can take action to take a motion to add that at this point in time.
So I'm looking for a motion to add the approval of our last meeting back on March, the date slips my memory.
24th, I believe.
Yeah, do I have a motion to approve the minutes or to change the agenda for the approval minutes? Is that the route we need to go?
Motion to amend the agenda.
So I need a motion to amend the agenda to include the approval of the regular minutes from the March 24th meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Mark, before you act on that, do you want to go ahead and strike the other one too, so you only have to take one action to amend the agenda instead of two?
That sounds good. As part of that motion, then we'll start over. So I'm looking for a motion to amend the agenda to include approval of the regular board minutes from March 24th, and additionally to on page 2, section 9B3, this gentleman has decided to rescind her. This lady has decided to rescind her request for a leave of absence. So do I have a motion? Thank you.
So moved.
All right. So I have. All right. I'm not sure who the second one was there.
Tom.
All right. Any discussion around that? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you. All right. So now we will look for a motion to approve the minutes from the March 24th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on those minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, moving on to board level committees. My only question was, Casey, are there any plans? I know the district improvement has another meeting scheduled. Do you think they'll be trying to hold that in the same manner as we are doing tonight?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Does anybody have anything from any of the committees?
No.
Okay, moving on to board level activities. I have been invited to a board president's virtual meeting that I'll be attending in early April. Does anybody have anything else?
No.
No, information exchange, they just dropped their April meeting, which was the last one anyway. They're always looking for subject matter for the next school year. I'm sure they'll come up with a few from COVID.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now moving on to old business. We have no old business, so we're going to move on to the consent portion. We do have an addendum to this portion of the meeting.
Motion to accept the consent agenda amended plus the addendum.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions about this portion of the meeting, the consent portion? Okay, all in favor of the consent portion of the agenda, including the amendum?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, that, I believe, I'm not exactly sure, I didn't mention how far that went. Kind of lost it on my phone here.
Bottom of page 5.
All right, so after that, so we're going to the bottom of page, we're going to the top of bottom of page 5. All right, so going on, do we have any disposable recycling surplus obsolete equipment? No. All right, so top of page 6. We have some bids and requests that we need to act on. Do I have a motion to accept these bids from fine paper?
Yeah, motion to accept them both.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Second, any discussion on these bids? All in favor of the bids?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on to contracts and agreements. Do I have a motion to accept this contract?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. All right, moving on to administrative reports. Dr. Kosork.
All right, start out tonight hoping that everyone is staying safe and healthy. Unfortunately, we have had some extended family within the Hilton learning community be diagnosed with COVID, and our thoughts and prayers continue to be with those families. I know many of us are in quarantine, but if you did get out for a drive, you will notice that the governor's order of having all flags at half-mast for the close to 11,000 New Yorkers who have passed from COVID. You'll notice that throughout the school grounds in the community. Today we did celebrate Lighted Up Blue for autism awareness throughout the district. So we did do that virtually. I thought that was a great opportunity for us to continue to grow in the current crisis. I'd like to thank Josh Ennis, Grace Sism, and Julie Norris for making sure that we're able to hold the meetings the way we are, whether it's holding public comment, live streaming, also transcribing the meetings. So we greatly appreciate, although some may see this as a small feat, it continues to support the safety of all of us during this pandemic. We received some sad news this weekend. I wanted to recognize that the Hilton learning community suffered a great loss on Sunday with the passing of Mr. Scott Kelberg. He was a Hilton graduate and a special education teacher at Quest Elementary School and a longtime athletic supervisor. So we keep his family and his friends and the greater Hilton learning community in our thoughts and prayers. I will surely keep everybody informed on any ways that we would honor his life during the pause here in New York State. I also want to take the time to thank members of the learning community for all of their efforts on behalf of our students. Students are what we're all about, and it moves me to see all of the work that's done to support our students, whether academically, socially, emotionally. We all understand the impact that this has had on all of our lives as adults. Only imagine the impact that that's having on the young people that we are educating. So my heartfelt thanks to everyone who's going above and beyond for our students, feeling very many thoughts of sympathy for our students, especially our seniors at the high school, as they move through their senior year in these unprecedented times. I'd also like to thank all our healthcare workers, especially those connected to the Hilton learning community. Many parents, spouses, relatives are putting themselves in harm's way in our hospitals and throughout supplying our supply chains and our vendors to keep us all in the positions of safety that we're in. So special thanks to all those members of the Hilton learning community. If you've observed some of the press conferences recently, either at the federal level or through our governor, but especially through our county executive, Mr. Adam Bello, he mentioned it's unlikely that we will return to school this year. So we continue to prepare for that, and we also hold hope that we will overcome the pandemic and be able to assemble physically again in the near future. We certainly feel bad for all of our students for the opportunities that they're missing. And lastly, I want to thank the Board of Education for all of their support and much of the difficult work that needs to take place on a daily basis, and the fact that it's happening remotely. So I want to continue to thank our administration, our teachers, our SRPs, everyone in the learning organization. When I have conversations with colleagues, I feel very confident in the work that we're doing here in the Hilton Central School District. And I want to thank the Board of Education for their continued support. So thank you very much. That's all I have for you this evening.
All right, thank you, Casey. Adam, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I have a couple just department updates. So as you can, I'm sure you're all aware, Jeremy and I have been kind of pounding the budget and trying to figure out what's going on with all the pieces of parts related to that. You heard a good chunk of that today. We also had our second remote payroll that was a success. So we're able to still function at a very high level, even though we're not able to come on site. When I'm not looking at the budget stuff, we've been dealing a lot with the capital project. We've been working very closely with Harris Beach to determine, what the intent is of the executive orders of the government. And, capital project was on, capital project was off, capital project's back on. And now we're starting to gear back up for work that's being done on phase 2B. So Mark has been instrumental in that, in guiding us through that. They are currently have moved out all of the science classrooms that were scheduled to start over April break. And they are now accelerating the work that's being done in the boys and girls locker room and the team room. So we're continuing on with that work. We have all of the support directors have done a really nice job in their respective areas. So it's made it very easy for me with that. From Scott, I think we're up to serving over 20,000 meals for the food service department. We have 2 rotations of people. They come in every other day. We have about 16 folks who work together. They do practice social distancing, and they are wearing masks and gloves and making sure that they have proper food safety handling. So they're doing a really nice job when it comes to feeding our students of the community. And when they're not doing that, and this goes for all the directors, they are putting together professional developments and working with the Office of Human Resources and getting those out to the employees and then recording who's completed those. So that's in all areas of the support directors. In transportation, we are continuing to work with the Department of Transportation. They're continuing on with bus inspections, believe it or not. Even though we're not on the road right now, we still have them in our facility every week. So we are still servicing our buses, making sure that they are passing inspection so that in the event that we do come back, we're able to not have all of our buses off the road. So that's been a big plus. We also, in the area of safety and security, have our 7 positions that we're rotating through, providing security to our buildings and accepting deliveries, as well as delivering mail to 20 plus staff members throughout the district. And on the buildings and ground side, we have our head custodians and our maintenance mechanics, including our grounds department. They're working 5 hours a day in order to keep the buildings up and running, preventative maintenance. They still have to do fire inspections, things of that nature. They are supporting the capital project. And you know, even though there's COVID, the grass is still growing. So we still have to mow lawns and trim and all sorts of things like that. So, you know, they're doing a great job. We're keeping it to a bare bones minimum, the least amount of people for the least amount of time to get the job done. And so far, they've all done a really nice job. So a big thank you to them. That's all I have.
Thank you, Adam. Any questions for Adam? All right, moving on for Scott. Anything from Scott?
I just want to, again, recognize the Office of Human Resource staff, Christina Clamo, Debbie Palmieri, Wendy Radford, and Brittany Nazardini. As evident by this agenda, we've been able to conduct business as usual with the consent portion of this agenda. I think it's probably 5 of 7 of the pages. You'll notice that we're able to continue to hire people, work on people that are resigning and transitioning out of the organization, people taking leaves of absence. Because of the work we've done over the last 7+ years, creating a digital process, we were positioned very well to be able to continue with that work, and we're doing it at a very high level. The things the new work that we're experiencing is looking for ways to conduct those special events. One that's coming up at the next board meeting is the tenure recognition, and how will we do that? It's very challenging for probationary teachers to get through that period of time and become tenured with the Hilton Central School District. We take great pride in those that are able to reach that tenure status, and we want to celebrate that. And so how we do that, make it as personable as possible, will be a challenge, but something we're working on the side. We're also starting to plan for the retirement celebration and service award recognitions that we do at the end of the year. So those special events are becoming challenging because we're doing it remotely, but we also are spending a lot of time to try to plan to recognize those folks that deserve the recognition for the service to the district, retirement from the district, or hitting milestones where they reach tenure and things like that. So a lot of work from my team, very proud of them, and business as usual. So we're very fortunate to be where we are, but I can't say enough about the work that they do. So thank you to my department.
Thank you, Scott. Anybody have any questions for Scott? Okay, we're moving on to Dr. Suresh.
Hi, sorry about that. As Casey was mentioning, we're planning for a long-term being out, but knowing that the governor likes to have 2 weeks out, but we know that we're continuing to plan. So some of the things that we put in place prior have really helped us. And now we're kind of going into phase 2 and refining things. I'm continue to meet with the teacher leaders. Very busy week for the Office of Instruction with respect to information that came out from the state. So at the elementary level, I just met with the principals, and we're looking at how we're going to be doing report cards for that 3rd marking period, as well as we're very close to implementing our kindergarten registration. And then we have a couple of other things that we'll be talking about. At the secondary level, the Regents exam, they canceled the Regents exams, so students still need to be able to pass the course in order to get that credit. We're still waiting to hear from the state on what that designation would actually look like on the transcript, because it just doesn't affect a student this year. It can affect a student all the way out into 5 years if they're taking a Regents and they're in 8th grade. The dual credit, we have a very good relationship with the colleges that we work with, and that's going along really well. WMOCO has been extremely responsive. They're sharing with us students who are participating, students who they're having struggle with participating, and students who we aren't hearing from. That information I've then sent over to the high school, and the high school is also reaching out to those students. It's important because some of those are the credits that the students need in order to graduate, whether they're either seniors this year or juniors, and also juniors if they're going to continue on next year. So it's really critical that those students still continue to do that. In the area of secondary for international baccalaureate, all of the students will get the credit for the courses and get their diplomas, but they have to hand in their internal assessments. So right now they're in the thick of that and they're doing a lot of work. So some of that work has been a little bit more than what they would normally be doing in the other weeks because those internal assessments are in. AP, as you know, has changed their test. It no longer, it's only going to be a 45-minute test, which is an open book test, and it's a 1 to 2 free response. So that will be interesting to see for the students. They've also said that it won't cover anything past the March timeframe. Our technology department had the first time out had sent out 200 computers to students, and then just today we deployed over about 350 computers. They worked with the transportation department. The technology and the transportation worked really well together. They actually delivered those computers to people's homes. Now we're in the phase of also repairing computers. We have about 80 computers that we have to repair, and we have a process for a drop-off and a pick-up, being very cognizant of also making sure that we do social distancing and people are masked and those type of things. CSCs are continuing to happen, and they're working really hard with that. I also realize that we're going into week 5, that I really should be having some times to reach out to the teachers. I've gotten a lot of emails from them and spending a lot of time with that. But on Thursdays, I'm going to have a kind of like a drop-in that teachers can come and ask questions. I can give feedback. I also have a form for them to submit questions prior to it. So they can either stay the entire hour and a half, they can stay for part of the time, they could submit a question, and then I'll be just sharing out that information with them. So we're moving along. We're working really hard. We're working on our title grants, looking at our title grants of kind of closing out some of the things, some of the money that we had budgeted for, we're not going to be able to use. And then also working on writing the title grants for next year. And we're working also with Jeremy from the business department. He's going to be joining us for that because he's instrumental in that part too. So that's about it from the Office of Instruction.
Any questions from Barb? Okay, to close things up, we don't have any upcoming events, and then we have a list of agenda items for our next meeting. Does anybody have anything else they want to say before we leave? I was just going to add that I really appreciate the in-depth reports at the end there. That really paints a picture that even though we're physically not in schools, things are still going about as they normally would. And it's great to see, just from my own experience with my own kids, how their teachers are reaching out and making the best of a pretty tough situation. So I commend all of you for leading that for us during these unprecedented times. Anybody else got anything to say? I miss all you guys. All right, if no one else has got anything to say, I guess we're done.
I got one quick one. I was muted,
All right.
sorry. Just a quick thank you for Josh for putting this all together. I thought it worked flawlessly and much appreciated.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All right, sounds good, guys. Good to see you. Stay safe. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Good
Have a good
night.
night.